Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this opportunity to engage with our panelists on the benefits and challenges of cannabis in pediatric conditions in legal states. It's my pleasure to introduce our participants who will be available to answer your questions following this discussion. Our panelists include Janel Donovan, Hera Osborne, and Don Wells. For more information about our participants, please refer to the speaker biographies in the center of your screen. My name is Dr. Kenton Crowley, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. This session is interactive, so please submit your questions by clicking on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen and type your questions into the drop-down box. We will address your questions via email following the discussion. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, Janel Donovan. She's the mother of Raegan, a 6-year-old daughter that has a genetic disorder called Rett syndrome, as well as a seizure disorder. Janelle is the CEO of ANSHI, a company which she founded and was born from the necessity in a hospital at Raegan's bedside. Hera is the mother to two 15-year-old twins that have Fragile X syndrome, the leading cause of autism. She works for Silver State Trading based out of Sparks, Nevada, for the past 2 years and is currently the sales manager. Hera is an advocate and speaker regarding the use of cannabis in autism and other developmental disabilities and rare diseases. Dawn Wells is a board member on Riley's Smile Foundation, and she is a former police officer. Dawn has a 16-year-old daughter, Kennedy, who has autism, epilepsy, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, is disabled, and lives in pain daily. So what I'd like to start with, let's start with Janelle. Can you tell us what brought you into being a canna mom?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. My daughter has Rett syndrome and then separately a mass in her brain that caused epilepsy. So we had some developmental delays, and then all of a sudden we were hit with a pretty big diagnosis at about 2 years old. And her seizures hit first, and we had an ER doctor that did an MRI and was like, there's a mass in the brain. And that was on top of the Rett syndrome diagnosis. And kind of my understanding of it is, you know, the brain is pretty complex, but abnormal activity is abnormal activity, and there's epileptic and non-epileptic. It's kind of defined a lot by the medications we have to treat things. So we have medicine for the epileptic and we don't for the non, technically. And when Raegan's seizures hit, it also sparked her non-epileptic brain activity that is Rett syndrome. And she stopped sleeping. It was a little bit out of a scene like The Exorcism, where she was up all night and she was crazy and pharma drugs didn't work. They made her worse. And at that point, we were desperate. We were willing to try anything. I think when your kid's not sleeping and the family isn't sleeping, and she was self-harming and she was obviously in distress. Her brain was going crazy. So we kind of had seizures. We dealt with the seizures pretty quickly. Things calmed down. And then the Goliath appeared, and the Goliath has no treatment. Rett syndrome is currently considered untreatable and incurable. Commonality with autism is the abnormal brain activity that's not epileptic, and it's quite severe. So the result of that period of time, which is generally called a regression, is you lose all ability to swallow, to walk, to use your hands. And, you know, we just cared about sleep at first. So I had a friend and we had some medicine sent to us, and it was full plant, and we weren't afraid to go high on dosing and fell into kind of knowing what was going to work for her really quickly in terms of high THC and full plant. Initially, we were about passing her out, and the dosing was quite scary at first, except for when it worked. And then we figured out what actually got her to sleep and didn't care about a number. The number was arbitrary to us. And then we really saw that carry over to the day. And all of a sudden we saw that she woke up calmer and she wasn't staring at the sky. She was looking at me again and she was using her hands. And we've been living the world of trying to keep that presence and awareness. We use cannabis to keep our daughter's presence at the end of the day. If what we've found is if we can keep presence, all of the other bodily functions continue to function as they should in terms of swallow and hands and walking. And so that was really where our journey began, was carrying over this great gift that was given to us that gave us sleep, but then seeing how it really carried over to morning. So, and then we've been on that journey for the last 5 years ever since. So.
Great. Dawn, why don't you tell us about what led you down this path to cannabis?
Well, kind of like Janelle, I was kind of at my wit's end with Kennedy. I kind of had the same thing. Kennedy had started with seizures when she was a baby, and they were undiagnosed. And then the doctor was holding her when she was a toddler, and she had a seizure in his arms, and it was it was just a partial complex seizure, and then she ended up having she has 4 different types of seizures. She has drop seizures. She has all different kinds of seizures, and no medication is able to control them. So she's on all type, and then now she ends up she's allergic to all the medications, to the seizure medications. So we don't know what to do. We've had her on all these medications. We've tried every single different kind. We don't know what to do with them. She has, several seizures a day. None of them are grand mal seizures. However, she's having, sometimes she'll have 10 seizures a day. Sometimes she'll have 20 seizures a day. Sometimes we don't even know how many seizures that she's having that we don't know about. And then on top of that, she's autistic, and she's going through times where she's not sleeping. She's had 4 brain surgeries. So the neurological side of it, her brain has been affected. So in ways that we don't know that due to the surgeries and everything, because she has so much scar tissue up there, that she doesn't sleep half the time. So we were dosing her up with melatonin. She would just start screaming in the middle of the night. We didn't know what was wrong. She was in pain. She'd start banging her head. And a friend of mine, I heard on the radio this advertisement for it was for a fundraiser, and it was for Riley Smile Foundation, and it was just a thing for an event, and I was big into fundraising, and it was something that had just started, and I started talking to Riley's mom, and she got me into it. And she had just started, her daughter had cancer, and she just started with the dosing and everything. And she's like, we'll try it. And she had somebody out in Colorado that was helping her and sending her some stuff and everything. And we just started, we started Kennedy out on small stuff, and then we just built her up, and it's helping. It's helping, but she needs, Delaware laws are very, she doesn't have a card. She doesn't have a medical card. She can't get one because because of what she has. So Delaware hasn't approved it yet. So we're on a different side of it. It's hard. It's tough. It's very tough. So Kennedy's we're getting ready to go to Legislative Hall right now to do an addendum to Riley's law to get the law changed and everything. So Kennedy's getting it under a different area.
Okay.
But it's helping, and we're doing the best that we can with her and everything. And it's tough. It's very tough. So I'm just trying. I'm new to all of this, and I'm trying to soak up every little bit that I can. So all the information I can on it.
This routine to use cannabis. Oh, how long ago?
Do what?
How long ago was it that you engaged with Riley's foundation? And
I've been with Riley Smile Foundation for 3 years, and she started but Kennedy didn't get to start using it until this past year.
Okay, so it's just been a little bit.
Yeah, just recent.
Okay.
Yeah, very recent.
Well, Hera, why don't you tell us about how long it took you, and why you turned to, cannabis as a treatment solution for your twins?
Okay. So much like Janelle and Dawn's story with their children, our need, well, let me back up. I have twins that have something called 15-year-old twins that have something called Fragile X syndrome, which is the leading genetic cause of autism. And so it is a blood test. We know exactly what it is. They know exactly what's wrong. It's a CGD repeat. The higher number of repeats, the more profoundly affected the child is. Because my son only has one X chromosome, he is severely affected. So this is my son. I don't know, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. That's my daughter. And this is both of them for Rare Disease Day. But I wanted to show you pictures because I think it's important. But with Fragile X, chromosome, he's nonverbal at 15, still in diapers. Much like Janelle, Janelle's daughter, my son doesn't sleep. So it's because he doesn't sleep, he's in fight or flight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So his body is in flexion. So we were in a position, his dad is a Major League Baseball player. So he was traveling and he was gone for 8 weeks straight, and DJ is his name, wasn't sleeping. And so a friend of mine at the time had one of the top health stories in the country. So people were coming to her and bringing her CBD and THC and heard about my twins. And they said, she needs to try this. And it was this, vial of medicine, this syringe. And in that syringe was something called RSO, Rick Simpson oil, which is some of the heaviest, most potent THC available. Also an amazing product. So we gave him a half of a rice grain on a piece of banana, popped it in his mouth. Within the hour, he was asleep and slept through the night. It changed our lives, literally changed our lives, because he woke up ready, available, rested, happy, not lethargic, strung out, angry, head-hitting, self-injurious behaviors. I was so reluctant for so long. So we were not a legal state at that time, recreational. We hadn't even started the licenses for dispensaries. And I was getting the medicine in California, and the medicine was inconsistent. And at the time, I was so judgmental because I wasn't on this side of the business. And now to understand it the way I do, it's agriculture. So sometimes it'd be like tart, and other times it would be like maple syrup when I was giving it to my son. And so it was inconsistent. So I felt the need to get involved in making the medicine, bringing it to people, being a voice that never grew up trying it ever and was completely against it. And so, okay, I was sorry, I was reading that. And so anyways, it changed the course of our lives. And now I am a big advocate because both of my kids take tinctures, ratio-based tinctures, and also take a medicine by the name of Troche because it's super fast acting. And my son takes Rick Simpson oil to this day. And I'm very fortunate. Dawn, my heart goes out to you. I'm very fortunate because we live in Nevada where it's recreational. And all I can say is just keep fighting. You know, there's no handbook and there's nothing out there that shows you the map to get to where you have to be. But at some point in time, the people that you're talking to are going to need this medicine. And it might not be now, but at some point in time, someone they love is going to need it. So your voice needs to remain strong because you know that this works. And there's unity in numbers. And the journey is not easy. It really isn't, but you're making a huge difference. I mean, there's so many times I wanted to stop and turn around where people would judge, right? But they have the same medicines, the same 5 medicines, trazodone, risperidone, all these different medications, and they're all different. Rett syndrome, Down syndrome, Fragile X, just ADHD, all these things. You know, a friend of mine, her kids have a genetic rare disease, and we sat there going, why the same medicines? But yet cannabis is a lock and key system, right? It goes to exactly where it needs to go for all 3, like all of our kids. I have 2 that are on it. So for 4 of our children, and it works. It's just breaking the barriers and being that voice of reason that why does this have to be legal or so difficult to access or so expensive to access when this is something that genuinely works for our children. Because nothing had ever worked for my son before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
that's
Janelle, go ahead. Tell us.
Go ahead.
What comes to your mind when you hear, Dawn and Hera's story and how it relates to your challenge?
We all walk a very similar walk. You know, we're all dealing with conditions that mostly are considered untreatable. They can kind of match to a couple medicines, a couple of symptoms, but really at the heart of it, the abnormal non-epileptic brain activity is considered untreatable by modern medicine. And that's the bottom line. The common denominator between all of our syndromes and diseases and everything that's wrong, Neuroland, is clear as day in an EEG. You have a normal EEG or you have an abnormal EEG. And so it's baffling to me that we all face such similar journeys, but very hard roadblocks and barriers to entry. I can't tell you how many parents are so afraid of the broad spectrum of cannabinoids, especially THC, as being a high, a topic that a lot of parents, it's hard for them to cross over the barrier. You hear great things about CBD and you want to utilize the plant, and there's a ton of science. You know, when I first started this journey, I just went straight to Google, but not Google. There were no like mommy blogs. I was in the land of research, and I was reading papers, and a lot of them coming out of Israel. And I read the research that showed that our brain has a receptor for THC. And because I was trying to understand, well, why does my kid need THC? And she doesn't need just THC. She needs a boatload of it. And when we're dosing for Raegan, she has from a genetic standpoint, Raegan has the worst mutation that they've kind of documented in Rett syndrome. There's a broad spectrum of mutations, but Raegan has one of the worst mutations of Rett syndrome. Add on top of that a separately caused epilepsy diagnosis. Anyone will tell you, wow, early onset of seizures is bad, right? If you've got autism, seizure, the two sides of the brain don't play nicely together. Once your kid seizes, I've got 3 days of rehabbing because the non-epileptic brain activity goes through the roof. I mean, I live it daily. And so we had a double whammy when she was 2. And my thing with parents and anyone looking to get into this space, we all have such different children, but there are huge common denominators, is I really like to try and narrow it to what are you trying to treat? And no one is going to help you figure that out. Your doctor's not, I can't, in full disclosure, Raegan still doesn't have a medical card, even though we should. And we've gone through quite the battle the last 2 years with her acutely and medically, and it just hasn't been on the priority list. Ultimately, none of her doctors will touch what we're doing with cannabis because there's no reason that Raegan shouldn't have a G-tube by now, be in a wheelchair, have lost full control of her hands and basically almost all of her presence. And so every doctor that comes across her says, whatever you're doing, don't stop it. And so we it became less important to me to go to a doctor. We consulted one very early on because when I was trying to treat her seizures with just CBD alone, it required a different level of dosing and it requires a lot more tracking than when I was treating Rett syndrome. I was treating big symptoms. Is she crazy or is she calm? Is she looking at me or is she looking at the ceiling? This is mommy science. This isn't, I think you've got to find the balance. And even to this day, we're very complicated in what we do. And some days I just want to throw it all away and just go, how is she doing? And how does she look? And how does she feel when I touch her? And sometimes I dose from the heart. And, I kind of ebb and flow between those worlds. But in the beginning, we were trying to maintain Raegan's presence. And we're trying to still to this day, we're dosing her to maintain her bodily control. So Raegan shouldn't be walking to this day. And every time we have a medical issue that causes seizures, she's at risk for not walking again. And we continually live in a battle of keeping her, she's never aspirated in her life, but that's something that's very common. Scoliosis is also very common in Rett syndrome. And she has, to this day, my daughter is 6 years old and she has none of the markers of Rett syndrome from a clinical perspective. So she hasn't lost full hand control. And those are things that I still dose for every day. Ultimately, I can get more granular, but,
How, you've heard, Dawn, these scenarios and challenges. You're in a spot that even makes it more challenging to access material that, I want to ask you all, what are the challenges that you find getting consistent product? And oh no, we lost Dawn.
We lost her.
Oh,
no, we lost her.
Well, Dawn, go ahead and tell us, how you're dealing with that situation.
Getting the product.
Yes.
Well, I get it actually through J. Madler, who gets it through. She gets it for her daughter, and she gets it. It's kind of through the vine, kind of get it through me. Yeah. And I have to do it through that way. And if it wasn't being for being involved with Riley's Smile Foundation, it costs a lot of money. That's the bad part. It costs a lot of money. And I do have a good neurologist for her that we'll probably be able to get a card for her very soon for her. But the problem, like her neurologist is saying, is that that the dosages that she needs to keep her, to help her because of the pain that she's in, because of her arthritis, and then her other neurological issues, conditions and stuff that she has. She needs very high dosages, and then she's got her seizure disorder, and then she has her autism. So it's different. It's different strains, different kinds that she needs. So it's like, okay, she needs all these different kinds and stuff, and it costs a lot of money. And then you're talking about bringing all that in, and that's a lot. Like, that's a lot of money. I mean, that's a car payment. That's a car payment every month, trying to get that, to bring that in every month, and then no card, and so yeah, it's tough. It's very tough, and it's actually legal for adults out here. It's legal for adults, but not for children. So
well,
it's very tough.
How have you dealt with supply sourcing? What have you been successful with acquiring product for your kid?
Is that for me? Sorry, it was breaking up.
Yep, Hera.
Okay.
We were talking about.
I dealt with sourcing and supply.
Yep.
Well, again, it's a bit different for me, because as soon as I found out that this worked, I dove in 2 feet to get really involved, to help create products and to bring products to the marketplace. And that was my journey to Silver State Trading, that's located here in Sparks, Nevada. They actually produce a product that I helped create from the beginning. And so sourcing the product at first was very difficult, because we were sourcing it from out of state, and it was a product that was given to us. But still, getting a good Rick Simpson oil here is very difficult, because it is agricultural, right? And it is not perfect, but the consistency of Rick Simpson oil is so thick that we've had to try other things. So being able to find products has been wonderful, due to the fact that I'm right there. I can walk to the back lab and meet with the people that are doing the research and development, and give them the feedback as to what is needed. So it was a hard road to travel for a very long time, and nothing is perfect. There are still nights that DJ doesn't sleep. He requires 24-hour round-the-clock care 7 days a week. That will never change. I don't live for a cure. I live today to make sure that he gets his Rick Simpson oil and his CBD. And like you said, Janelle, a lot of people look at this and think, you're giving your kid cannabis, like THC. Yeah, he gets some of the strongest THC available to man. Cancer patients get it. And that is the only thing that will shut his little system down to make him relax, to be able to sleep. And it's funny, because 6 years ago, I went to the lead researcher for his diagnosis, who gets all the grants that she could ever wish for. And I talked to her about cannabis, and now look at them. They're doing a deal with a synthetic cannabis company, big pharma. It's not the same, doesn't have the same results, still affects your kidneys. So, when people of that magnitude reach out to me and send people to me to talk to me, it makes this journey make sense, because it has been one hell of a journey to get the right medicine and the right dosing. And, I've met with Dr. Crowley, and I've talked to Dr. Crowley so many times, and this doesn't make sense. What can I do? He's not sleeping. He's losing patches of his hair on his head this big. Well, that's because the school district wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and he was getting injuries at school. It wasn't because of cannabis. Can you imagine what would have happened if he didn't have the cannabis on board that was making sure that the inflammation was going down? So to answer your question, Dr. Kent, I've been incredibly blessed by the journey that we've traveled to be right here in an area where I can meet with doctors and researchers and talk to them and let them know what's working, what's not working. You know, what about a different delivery system? The only problem is, you know, regulations. There, you know, we can only do so much, you know, and Nevada has done a good job at regulating things. They've regulated, you know, gambling and prostitution, and now they've regulated cannabis. But we should, it's difficult because the focus here is so much on rec, but it's still rec for medical patients, because it's all people that are going there need this for medicine, whether they understand it or not, you know? So it's our children that we're doing this for, but we're breaking down barriers and doors for people that wouldn't ask these questions if we didn't have our stories to share.
Well, in asking about the practitioners that you've engaged with to help with your children's conditions, Janelle, have you had challenges with getting support for the use of cannabis with your daughter? Have you had doctors report you to child care services, child protective services? Have any of you, starting with Janelle, had to deal with that other dimension?
Yeah, I'm laughing. Did I ever ask for permission? I never asked for permission. It's my child, and if she's suffering, it's my responsibility to make her better before anyone else's, before a doctor, before a hospital. So I guess the big thing with me was I never asked for permission. And I figured if I was doing the right thing, that would show, because Raegan had such a double whammy ahead of her and could have ended up so very different so very quickly. We're talking about being basically in a semi-conscious state by 2.5, with every bodily function not in her control was supposed to be her. That was the given, right? So I never asked for permission. I had a good pediatrician. I let her know what I was doing, and then that was it. It was our neurologist actually locally was the one that I got in touch very early on, because the sleep issue was so severe, and our neurologist was like, she reacts the opposite of every drug that was supposed to make her asleep, made her worse. So he was kind of scratching his head, and he's like, I know of this family in North County, and they use high THC, and maybe you want to talk to them. And so I talked to the dad, and he was the first one that made me like not afraid to go above 120 milligrams. I mean, if we're talking in milligrams, I had a 2-year-old daughter that eventually what passed her out was 150 milligrams, 160 milligrams of THC. That was only to pass out for 3 hours at the time. But really, if you think about what the brain is doing in a regression for something severe like Rett syndrome, that is not surprising. So I think we have a tendency in cannabis to isolate cannabis and go, well, this amount is so heavy. If you actually look at the research coming out with Epidiolex and the trials going out with Epidiolex right now, the ranges for therapeutic dosing for Epidiolex are like 100 milligrams to 1,000, you know, in safe ranges. Why? Because cannabis is pretty safe to go really high. And ultimately, it comes down to how crazy is that EEG. One day, my daughter had a normal EEG. 2 weeks later, her AEG could have been like knocking everything out of the park, right? I mean, that's, if we talk about a body losing the ability to swallow or losing the ability to walk, that means the brain is really going crazy. So it didn't, you know, it makes sense to me intuitively that it would take such high doses. And we found ourselves very early on. Rick Simpson oil was really great. To this day, I make my own pills at home from 3 different sources of medicine, and a little bit of Rick Simpson oil finds its way in. But ultimately, our journey got really complex because Raegan was doing so well for so long, up until 4 years old, that a lot of times people didn't think anything was wrong with her, except for the fact that she was mostly nonverbal. And what ended up hitting us really hard was she got sick and it went undiagnosed. We had a very bad acid that hit. So I was very big early on, and we found cannabis and we were treating the brain, and we forgot about the rest of the body. And so my kid had a horrible stomach acid problem. It went undiagnosed because how does a 4-year-old tell you that they have acid? They freak out, they cry, all of these things, right? And it ended up in a standoff. Raegan stopped eating deliberately for 10 days in the hospital, and they did what's called a advanced care meeting. They do that with parents like us, where severe conditions like Rett syndrome, they go, your child's chronically declining, prepare for the worst. And my kid was just sitting in a hospital going, I'm not going to take anything else because something hurts every time you put it down me. And it was this huge standoff. And finally, it took us 12 days to get a GI consult. And finally, they found out acid. But she was put on 80 mLs of omeprazole and almost died of E. coli 3 months later. Oh. And E. coli spread everywhere. And our world changed after that. We're still coming out of the trauma of basically 2 years of hospitalizations, 9 major infections, 2 intubations. Well, I almost lost her more times than I can count. Most of the life-saving stuff happened at home on my watch. So obviously tons of seizures, throw in a couple statuses here and there. And so my journey just turned because she was doing so well. And we got caught off guard by something as benign as acid. And then we weren't warned about the effects of antacids. And then, now here we are 2.5 years later. She's alive. She hasn't chronically declined. We survived the worst of it. We're rebuilding her health from the ground up, smarter. We've revised cannabis more times than I've counted. And we use all modes of delivery of it because to this day, if it wasn't for cannabis, Raegan would have died, number 1. If it wasn't for cannabis, she would have chronically declined, number 2. But that took a lot of adjusting in acute situations, when your kid's in a seizure coma for 12 days. And, I was super dosing her. I always changed medicine for the acute situation. So I feel like, at times when Raegan first started to get sick was where we had doctors start questioning the cannabis, especially when she had E. coli and she was sleeping a lot. Our ped started to turn on me a little bit, and it was a very scary situation. We had CPS involvement several times, and I just had to hold my ground. I kept just saying something is wrong with my child. I know something is wrong with my child. I treat her genetic condition quite well with cannabis. So if she's crying, it's because something is wrong, and your job is to figure it out. And, I was saying that all the way up until the day before she almost died at home. And then, we ended up in the ICU, intubated, and they all come out and they go, oh my gosh, she has E. coli and MRSA. And I'm like, yeah, we knew something was wrong. We kept telling you that for months and you ignored us. So wow. I just stood my ground, and I didn't care if people were questioning everything. I always felt that at the end of the day, if what we were doing was the right thing for Raegan, that would show through. And, I felt like at the end of the day, the right thing always ends up appearing. So don't be afraid about, what doctors think, and don't be afraid if CPS comes knocking on your door, because if you're doing the right thing for your child, that doesn't mean that sickness can't happen. That doesn't mean that other things can't go wrong with their body, but you keep treating their brain, because what happens is if you get scared and something is going wrong with the body and you ignore the brain, well, the brain will come back to haunt you after the acute illness or during it. And so that's kind of my lesson through what we've been through. And never ask for permission. It's your child, and you have every right to do what's right for them. No government and no doctor should ever be able to take that away.
Dawn, what was the challenge that you had?
I'm sorry, you echoed there. What?
Support. What were the challenges that you had with getting physician support?
My big challenge with it was with this is that the hospital here is, at first everybody is on board with getting the cannabis and for children, getting it started and getting the bill passed, getting it all passed and approving it, so it can be administered for children and everything, so we can get the cards for the children and stuff. It was all great. We're like, all right, we can get Kennedy started on this, no problem at all. And I'd already started her on it, but I just couldn't afford to keep it going because it was just too expensive. Because I have 5 children, and my other children aren't. I've got one that's got heart issues too, but so it hadn't been an easy road for me. But so the hospital was backing, and then all of a sudden, when it came down to it, when we got to court to stand up and pass this bill and everything and sign the documents and everything, the hospital, all those doctors said no. They weren't going to pass. They weren't going to sign off, and all the doctors, once everything got passed, once the bill got signed and everything, well, then we went back up and said, well, the neurologist that was backing everything in the beginning, he backed out and said, no, I don't think Kennedy needs it. And I'm like, well, she's a perfect candidate. She's allergic to every single medication that's out there. She has adverse reactions. Janelle, just like your daughter. I mean, they accidentally, the pharmacy a few years ago gave her, the doctor put her on a medication, this medication for one of her autism medications or whatever. We decided to try one, and they ended up overdosing her. And they gave her way more than what an adult should have. This child weighed 60 pounds, and they gave her so much that she should have been in a coma. And I called the pharmacy, and I'm like, I don't know what's wrong. She's just like screaming, and she's spastic. It's like she's a lunatic. I can't control her. And he said, well, she is autistic. I said, no, this isn't how my child acts. And they said, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get used to it. She has autism. And I said, you don't know my child. You can't say that, this is because of the medication. She just started the medication. So I called the hospital because it was over the weekend. I called the hospital, and they said, well, what dose is she taking? And I told him, and they said, oh my God, is she okay? Because instead of giving her 0.01, they gave her 1.0. They gave her 1 milligram of this,
more. Wow.
10 times more. And they said, and then to top it off, I had to wean her off this medication. I couldn't just stop it. I had to wean her off of it. It was. I can't remember what it was. It was not Clonopin. Clonopin. I think it was something like that. It was terrible. They said that she should have been in a coma, and she had an adverse reaction because she was allergic to it. But all those medications, and then all the anti-seizure medications she's allergic to. So she has these reactions where she just goes nuts, and it's awful. And I mean, what am I supposed to do? You know, I don't know. I don't know what to do. She doesn't sleep, you know, but when she's any other time, she's just a sweet child, you know. And I was told when she was 2 years old that she'd never walk, she'd never talk, she'd never do anything. She wouldn't be able to. Well, she's 16 years old. She's walking, she's talking. She's got a job. She only works 3 hours a night, but
fabulous.
She actually,
that is so fabulous.
Yeah, she works at Chick-fil-A. But yeah, but she's wonderful. She's on a special needs cheerleading team. I mean, she's, you know, it's amazing. But she's had meningitis several times, you know, and I mean, I understand, Janelle, I understand the battles, the battles with the health and everything. I mean, it's tough. It's so tough. It's so tough with it. But I don't understand with what you were talking about with the acid. Is that something that
Dr. Kent can better explain. I learned the hard way, but it's not something well understood, I think. So I'll defer to him.
Well, one of the areas of medical focus now, cutting edge areas, is the microbiome. And, you know, functional alternative practitioners in the past have always known how important our second brain or gut is. And now there's a lot of science that recognizes how important the microbiome is in relation to our health. You know, there's 100-fold more bacteria in our GI tract that make up the microbiome than every cell in our body. And we share genetic material. We talk genetically with the bacteria that make up our microbiome. You can think of it like an estuary. You know, it's a complex system that utilizes all kinds of things in order to make things work, to balance. We know that cannabis is an adaptogenic herb, and adaptogens help our body reach homeostasis, or that balance that physiology is always looking for. And so Raegan had a situation where they, you know, regular Western medicine looks at the body's response to things it doesn't like by blocking that response, by stopping stomach acid. Well, stomach acid is the primary protection to infection being introduced to the GI tract. And when you take omeprazole, which is a proton pump inhibitor, and you stop the body's ability to create acid and protect the GI tract, all of a sudden you set it up for what Raegan had, which was an infection. She wasn't able to protect herself, and ultimately that required you know, a fecal transplant to ultimately help try and recreate that microbiome that would then protect her because of the challenges that she has with her immune system. So we're running short on time, and so what I'd like to do is just give each of you a minute or two in order to just you know, send a message out to our audience, you know, as a mom, someone that has daily challenges, that clearly you have all done wonderful things with your children, because they probably wouldn't be alive if they didn't have you as a mom, taking care of them, paying attention, challenging and fighting for their well-being. And my heart goes out to all of you. I've got to engage with a couple of you on a friendship and a medical basis, and I feel privileged to have been able to help facilitate some of, to help answer some of those physiologic and treatment challenges that you guys have had to deal with. So why don't we start with Hera, and then we'll go to Dawn, and then we'll end with Janelle. So what would you like to end with to our audience?
I think the most important thing is, as a mom, whether this is a new diagnosis that you're dealing with or a diagnosis that has been going on for several years, follow your instinct. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to reach out. There is no milligram dosing, even for big pharma. It's a guessing game. But you know your child, and you know, I think it was Dawn or Janelle that said, like, you dose from your heart. You know what they feel like, you know what they look like, you know what they need, because it is a lock and key system. Everything is a little bit different for everyone. So don't be fearful. As a good friend of mine once said, you know, there's no recorded passings from cannabis. I mean, this is a medicine grown in the ground for us to utilize, and we haven't been utilizing it properly, and we're just scratching the surface. The way we utilize it for my son is completely different than my daughter. I never thought I'd be standing in the kitchen and look over at my daughter and say, don't forget to take your tincture before you go to school. I mean, that is just, it was a surreal moment that I ended up texting a friend of mine that helped me to really wrap my head around this. And I said, you know, those words came out of my mouth. Or my daughter texting me, Mom, I'm feeling very anxious before I go to this. Can I take more? I mean, it's insane, but the norm becomes a different norm. And, you know, the MRIs and the EEGs and the gut health and everything, it all comes together because the CBD and the THC does help the gut, does help the swallowing, does help the reflex. It's a domino effect for every single part of your body, healthy part of your body, not just your brain. It's you know, like I said, it's lock and key. It's the entourage effect, and it's something that's real. So I guess my biggest thing is don't be fearful.
Dawn?
Hera pretty much nailed it on that. Took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, you have to go with your heart. I mean, you know, nobody knows your child more than you do, and you are your child's advocate. You're your best child's advocate. Nobody can fight for your child more than you can. And I mean, my mom is the one that told me that. She's the one that really taught me that. And who else is going to fight for your child more than you? And nobody knows your child more than you. And, yep. And you know how your child feels. No matter what any doctor says, you know how your child is feeling. You know how if it's okay, or if something is feeling okay, or the dosage is good or not good enough, or too much of any medication, or if it's working or not. And just everything is just go with your gut, and it's medical. I mean, Hera, I'm with you. I never thought, I'm an ex-police officer. I never thought that I'd be, I mean, it's not like I'm standing out in a corner, selling pot or anything, getting it, buying it and getting it for my kid or anything. But, I never thought that I would be giving it to my child. And in a million years, I never thought that, but it's what works. It's what works, and you do what you can for your child, and I'd do it a million times over than some of the medications.
All right. Well, Janelle, you got a couple minutes. How would you like to end it?
I think we're living in an unprecedented time in history. I don't think anyone needs to be worried about, is the science there? Don't let someone scare you because your syndrome or diagnosis is different than the ones that other people have had success with. I think at the end of the day, you know, the science is starting to catch up and there is power in numbers. And I remember anecdotally Raegan had just tanked. We had gone to Mayo Clinic in Rochester in the dead of winter, and she was intubated and seizing out of control with influenza A and in her little sleep coma. And I had to convince Mayo Clinic to allow me to dose whatever I was getting sent from Colorado and in whatever amount I wanted. And, you know, I feel like, again, we go back to this thing of we do not need to ask permission to do what is right for our children. There is power in the numbers. There's power in the science. Those practitioners can go and find the science. It exists. And if you do find yourself in a really scary, acute situation, don't be afraid to stand up for your rights, even in a hospital that doesn't allow it. You would be surprised at what is allowed if you come in with confidence and with a genuine heart, because it really did make critical differences in Raegan's ability to get through the infections that she was getting through and the subsequent years that were caused from it. But, you know, for us, we've been in this game now for 4 or 5 years. And in the beginning, it was just about, you know, I like to think of 3 major things that you have to think of anytime you're dabbling in cannabis. And it's, you have to find your cannabinoids, like what's going to be the right mix for your kid. Are they THC dominant or are they CBD dominant? Do they need CBG? There's such a breadth and depth of cannabinoids, and underneath that, the complexity gets more when you start to think about terpenes and strains, and then don't forget delivery method. What worked for my daughter 4 years ago, if we had stuck with that and said that was the be all end all, and never changed or adjusted, she wouldn't be here today. Don't be afraid to modify. Any medication, whether it's pharma or natural, needs to be modified because the body is changing. If your body goes through an acute situation and is in trauma, what was working for them is no longer going to work because their body and brain has changed. Yep. And sometimes we can't avoid those forces. In our case, it was that we contracted C. diff, and then we were living in a C. diff world for the last 2 years. But you know, ultimately, I adjust medication depending on what Raegan's going through. And acute situations mean more medication and different delivery methods. So don't forget about delivery method. Find your cannabinoid ratio. And underneath that, you can start to really get granular on what works for your kid. But don't be overwhelmed by it. Ultimately, dose for what works. And don't be afraid to try until you find something that works. The worst thing that you could do going into cannabis is not find support, because you need to talk to someone. Facebook groups are great, but there's a ton of multi-level marketing going on right now where someone's going to message you, say CBD worked for me, it changed my life, and it's going to work for you. And ultimately, this is medicine. It's not a business. And anyone promising you cures or something is going to work perfectly, you need a mom. You need someone to talk to. I can't underestimate, like, you need to talk to people that have been through this just for sanity's sake. We're all paving a new way. And in 20 years, the world will look different. But for right now, for your child, you need support. And so go find that support in any form you can, and don't be afraid to keep trying. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for their informative answers. And thank you to our wonderful audience today for your thought-provoking questions. You may continue submitting questions, and our speakers will follow up via email. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.